Well, hello. My name is Daniel Kirkendall. I'm the associate minister here at Forsyth Church of Christ, and I'm excited to be here today to bring you kind of what we do on campus on Sunday mornings here at Forsyth. So we'll have a message, and before we do that, we'll have a short video. But throughout this video, I want you to notice at the bottom of the screen, you'll see our website, facoc.org. I want to direct you there. There's a number of things that you can do there. You can give online. You can ask a question if you have a need or need help with anything else. If you want to get baptized, if you have a prayer request, we'll definitely honor that. You can also find out general information on our website. Worship times, we meet Sundays at 10 and Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. So that'll be on the bottom of the screen. John's going to bring you a great message. This is the last installment of a 4-part series during Recovery Month. So I hope that you enjoy this, and I hope that you enjoy this video that we'll use to get our minds in the right place.
Well, hello there. I'm John Dobbs, preaching minister for Forsyth Church of Christ. I'm really glad that you joined us, as Daniel indicated. We're really glad that you're going to be a part of this time. And we've been talking about recovery now for the past 3 sermons. And if you missed those, you can always find them on our YouTube channel. And they're really easy to access there. But have you ever wondered about the powerful magnetism of your past? The things in the past, how it influences your thoughts and your motives and your activities today. Well, as we conclude Recovery Month, we're going to be looking at a message that the recovery community is very much aware of, and that is the place of the past in our present. How the things that we've experienced in our life already influence what we're experiencing today. And we're going to look at that through the lens of Exodus chapter 14 in a message called Never Look Back. By the time we get to Exodus 14, the children of Israel have been enslaved in Egypt for over 400 years. And as those years went by, slavery became more and more intense. It became more difficult. And especially during the time where we see Moses going into Pharaoh's court and engaging Pharaoh. Pharaoh made things even harder on the children of Israel. And so it was a very difficult time. And God's presence was very evident. It was evident in 10 plagues that he sent upon Egypt. It was evident when Pharaoh finally let the people go. And they were led by the night by a pillar of fire, and by the day with a pillar of cloud. And it's just fascinating to even try to imagine what that must have been like. And it was a triumphant victory march out of Egypt into the wilderness. And it seemed like that would be like a time of shouting and joy and energy, and it was for a moment. But then there came this frightening realization. If you look at Exodus 14 and verse 5, it says, "When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, 'What have we done? We've let the Israelites go and have lost their services.' So he had his chariot made ready, and he took his army with him, and he took 600 of his best chariots, along with all the chariots of Egypt and the officers over all of them. And he begins this pursuit of the children of Israel. Now, the problem with that is not only are they not equipped to fight the king's army, they are up against a body of water called the Red Sea. And so they really have nowhere to go forward, and they have Pharaoh's army coming from behind them, and a spirit of crushing doubt took hold of them. When you look at verse 10, it says, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them, and they were terrified, and they cried out to the Lord. And they said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to have served the Egyptians than to die in the desert. And so in this moment where they had nowhere to go, and they can't go forward, and they can't go rushing into the arms of the Pharaoh's army, they turn against Moses, and they began to think about where they are, and they begin to look back. And this is a moment when Israel has to decide who they are and what they want. So I want to encourage you today. This is our encouragement for as we conclude Recovery Month. That's to never look back, because there's a danger zone when we look back. We're entering into a very dangerous territory. The Israelites are looking back to their stay in Egypt, and they're talking about it like that would have been better than what we're experiencing now. But if you think back and be realistic about what they were living in at that time, it was a time of slavery. It was a time of bondage. It was a time of struggle. It was a loss of identity. They were just the slaves of Pharaoh. They were not the children of Israel. It was a really difficult and hard time. And they're looking back upon that. But part of the problem is it's all they knew. It was 430 years there. And so this generation of the children of Israel, they grew up in this, and this is all they know. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt you brought us in the desert to die? So in a moment of rescue, they almost turned back into the oppression and pain of Egypt. And that's the problem with looking back. Sometimes we can look back and not really see things the way that they really were. We look back sometimes, and that can draw us back into our old life. We can think that was really not that bad. Maybe it wasn't that hard. Maybe it wasn't that painful. And we can be enticed into going back to the old ways and old lives that brought us pain and brought pain to those who are around us. Because the past is filled with reminders that can cause us to experience shame and regret and failure. And learning to let go of that past is the key to healing and to growth and to development throughout our lives. And if we're always looking back and thinking backward, that's a danger zone for us. In fact, the truth is, we need to look forward in our faith. But I want to be honest and say there are some obstacles in looking forward as well. It's not always the easiest choice. And some of those obstacles to going forward in faith might include the obstacle of fear. When the children of Israel looked at their situation, they were struck with fear. There's water or there's an army, and we have nowhere to go. And so fear began to fill their hearts. It says they were terrified. And fear is a powerful force in our motives and in our emotions. Sometimes we don't even know that it's fear that's driving us. Fear tells us not to believe in God's promises. Fear says we're on our own and God's not going to help us, and I can't make this on my own. Fear convinces us God's not at work. Fear lies to us and tells us that where we were is where we always will be, and we can't get better and we can't overcome. And fear just begins to fill up our thinking, and it changes the way that we think. Hundreds of times in the Bible, the words "do not fear" occur. Somebody said recently 365 times. And so every day of the year, you can read a verse that says, "do not fear." And yet, fear is something that we struggle with. And the answer to fear, and I like that song, "Fear is a liar," because it is. And so the answer to that fear is to turn to the one who tells us the truth, and that's to turn to God. There's an obstacle of fear, but when you're going forward, that's not the only obstacle. Another obstacle that we face is the obstacle of doubt and uncertainty. In verse 11, they began to question, was it, why did you bring us out here? What have you done by bringing us out to Egypt? And they began to blame Moses. And these are really human responses. When we read these stories in the Old Testament and anywhere in the Bible, we're reading about real human beings. And so it's not hard to understand why in this moment they began to question everything. We're finite people, and our experience and our knowledge and our perception is limited. But when we place our hope and our faith in God, we can trust Him to do what He promises because He never changes. He never wavers. But when we look at our going forward in faith, we can see sometimes doubt and uncertainty, and that can be an obstacle to overcome. A third obstacle that we can overcome is in going forward that we need to overcome is romanticizing the past. They're thinking back about Egypt and they're not thinking about how it really was. They're just thinking about how well we were not here caught between an army and a Red Sea. We had food to eat, we had a place to sleep, but they were also being treated brutally by Pharaoh and his people. And so they were kind of thinking about the past, but not in a realistic way. And part of being honest with ourselves is admitting the actions of the past were not fun. They were not exciting. They were underneath profoundly sad, and they caused a lot of pain. And so when we think about our past, we might be tempted to sort of play it up like, well, wasn't that fun? And weren't we living the life? But really, if we're honest, we know that wasn't true. So we can romanticize the past. And so those are some obstacles to going forward in faith. But that doesn't mean we can't go forward. It just means we have to push through some of those things that might be in our way. And so I want to give you some encouragements from verses 13 and 14, what Moses had to say to the people that I think might encourage us to give us the power to move forward. And the first thing he says to them in verse 14, he said, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm. Stand firm." As Pharaoh's army gets closer, Israel may be tempted to wave the white flag of surrender, but victory is right around the corner. And we know that because we can read the story and we know how it's going to turn out, but they don't know. And Moses says, look, don't go back now. Don't stop now. Don't retreat to the past now. Stand firm. Don't ever give up. Stay on that path. And look around you and notice for people, whatever it is that you're in recovery from, whatever is your struggle with, whatever hardship that you're facing, there are people who have survived it, people who have overcome, people who know that it isn't easy, but the way that you continue on that path is to stand firm. And Moses not only said stand firm, he said, you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. And then he goes on to say that the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. So stand firm and be still. Don't always be trying to chase after something. Just take a moment and be still. Trust God and let Him do the work. The victory had been won. In God's mind and in God's will, this has already happened. He already knows how it's going to go. All they had to do was walk across the Red Sea on dry land. God is going to part the water. God is going to hold off the Egyptians. God's going to destroy Pharaoh's army when the water is released, and they would not be threatened by them again. And by being still, that doesn't mean we're not trying, we're not putting forth effort. It means that as we make every effort to walk through the recovery that we're engaged in, we're trusting God with all of it. I'm not having to create recovery. I just have to appeal to God and walk in His path and let Him be at work, to stand firm, to be still, and to experience deliverance. When you get to verse 21, it says, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it to dry land. The waters were divided. The Israelites passed through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Can you imagine how frightening that might be to walk through on dry land And you know you're experiencing a miracle, because how else could this happen? But seeing this wall of water on both sides of you. And so it reminds us that the Lord will fight for us. In fact, in the next chapter, when they sing their victory song, it says the Lord is a warrior and God fights for us. God confused the Egyptian army. He took care of them. He kept them away. And all they had thought about before was going back. And God said, we're not going back. We're going forward. But you're going to have to experience this deliverance by standing firm. Be still. Let me do what I do. And therefore they were able to be delivered. The enemy is strong, but God is stronger. And so I want you to remember that on days when it's really hard, when whatever it is that you're trying to put away in your life, or ways you're trying to grow, or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish for the Lord, to stand firm and to be strong, and to know that He's going to deliver you. He's going to help you through it. See, when being faithful is uncomfortable or difficult, it carries some consequences that can be hard. But we want to stick with it. We want to stand firm, not look back, not think about retreating, not going back to our old ways, because we know where that leads and we know what's waiting for us back there. I like this phrase, this recovery slogan, one day at a time. That is such a great slogan. It really reminds me of things that Jesus taught. Don't be so caught up in the past. And don't worry about tomorrow. How am I going to face this tomorrow? What am I going to face the next coming day? Let's just think about today. You know, I was thinking this is a principle Jesus taught, and I was thinking about how He prayed in the garden less than 24 hours before He would be on the cross. And that's when Jesus prayed, let this cup pass, but let thy will be done. There within that day is when Jesus really began to pour on that prayer. And I think sometimes we make a mistake because we're praying, we're looking back, we're praying so much about the future, and what we really need to be doing is just living today, in this moment. The Christian focus is on today. Are you focused on today? Are you following Jesus today? That'd be our hope. That's why we do this. We want to point to Jesus. We'd love to help you find your path to Jesus. And if you're ready to take some next steps, I hope that you'll get in touch with us, because we'd like to study with you, help you on that, because I think that's the only answer that we have. And when I look at the children of Israel in this moment, in this time when they had to be delivered and only God could do it, He did. You don't have to go back to old ways. You're not trapped by the past. We might be defined by the past. We might have some things to deal with, but it doesn't set us in stone. It doesn't determine our today. And so we have those experiences. We don't want to go back to them. You know, if you go to a recovery meeting, most of the time they end with the Lord's Prayer. And I want us to say that together. And I want to encourage you at home, even if you're there by yourself, or even if there's somebody else around, I want you to say this prayer out loud with me, because I think it's a great prayer. And that's how we're going to end our message today, is by saying this Lord's Prayer, as they would say it in a recovery setting, because we're all in a recovery setting. And I hope that these 4 messages on recovery have been a blessing to you, and share them with somebody who's in recovery if you think it would be a blessing to them, because I think we're all definitely in recovery of some kind. Let's pray this out loud together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.